The first time it happened, I thought I was dying. Not in the dramatic way people talk about it later with tears and prayers and a hand reaching for the heavens. I mean the honest way, the private way, the terrifying way that steals your breath before your mind can find a name for the thing. I was lying in bed in the upstairs room of the Bell Hotel in Hollow Creek, West Virginia in the winter of 1934, and I could not move a finger. The coal stove had gone cold hours before. The window was rimmed with frost. My breath came shallow and thin. And at the foot of my bed stood a man I had never seen before, wearing a dark coat dusted with something black and wet, his hat pulled low enough to hide his face. He was not a dream. I know, because dreams do not smell like damp earth and old smoke. Dreams do not leave a line of coal dust on the quilt when they lean forward. Dreams do not whisper your name in a voice that sounds like it has been dragged through a tunnel for 20 years. "Evelyn," he said. My name was Evelyn March, and nobody in Hollow Creek had spoken it in that tone before. Not kindly, not human, not alive in any way I could recognize. I tried to scream, nothing came out. I tried to lift my arm. It stayed dead on the mattress, heavy as a sack of wet flour. Every muscle in my body felt nailed in place except my eyes, which were forced to stare at the figure at my feet while the whole room seemed to narrow down to that one shape. He stood there for a long time. Then he bent his head like he was listening to something under the floorboards and said very softly, "They never finished waking up." The next morning I told myself it had been an attack brought on by exhaustion. The war years had left me with too many nights of bad sleep, and the town itself had a way of getting into a person's nerves. Hollow Creek was the kind of place built around one thing and ruined by the loss of it. For 30 years the coal seam had fed the people, paid the store tabs, built the church, filled the schoolhouse, and buried half the men in town before their time. When the mine shut down after the explosion of 1921, the owners left, the railroad reduced service, and the hotel where I rented my room became a half-empty shell with 2 live-in boarders, a widow running the kitchen, and a front porch that creaked like it resented the world. I had come to Hollow Creek to work the night desk and sort the old records for the county clerk, a job no one else wanted. I had been hired because I could type, keep books, and stay quiet. Quiet was important in a town where everybody still spoke in lowered voices whenever the mine was mentioned, as if the hill itself might hear them. By breakfast time I had almost convinced myself the thing at the foot of my bed was only a fever image made from fatigue and the sour air of the hotel. Then I found the coal dust on the quilt. Not much, just enough to mark the cloth where the figure had leaned in. I rubbed it between my fingers. It was black, gritty, and cold, real enough to stain my skin. That same afternoon, while I was sorting files in the county room above the hardware store, I found the first old reference to the Bell Hotel. It had not always been a hotel. In 1918, when the influenza came through the valley, the building had been turned into a temporary ward because it was the only structure large enough to hold the sick and far enough from the school to keep the children out. The county clerk's records showed 47 deaths in 6 weeks, though the local paper at the time reported only 29. That difference bothered me. In small towns, lies leave paper trails. People forget to hide them properly. I asked the clerk, Mr. Harlan, what happened to the missing names. He didn't look up from his stamps. "Lost a few pages in the flood of 19, he said. "No flood came through here in 19. He gave me a tired glance that suggested I was asking questions in the wrong direction. Maybe not the water kind. That answer stayed with me. Hollow Creek had a way of speaking in riddles when plain truth would have been too ugly. That night I slept with the lamp on. The second time the paralysis came, it came even faster. I had barely closed my eyes when the room turned cold. I knew what was happening before I could stop it. The pressure settled over my chest, my breath shortened, my limbs went heavy and useless. And there he was again. Same hat, same coat, same stillness at the foot of the bed, as if he belonged there more than I did. This time he held something in his hand. A pocket watch. It dangled from a broken chain, swaying slowly in the dark. He opened it with his thumb and let me see the face inside, though there was no candle and no lamp, and I should not have been able to see anything at all. The watch had stopped at 2:17. My heart lurched so hard I thought I might tear free of my own body. The man raised the watch near the bed, and I heard a faint ticking inside my skull, not from the clock but from somewhere behind my eyes, quick and frantic like a beetle trapped in a jar. Then he leaned over me and whispered, "Count them." I could not breathe, I could not move, but my eyes were wide, burning, and I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. His hand was not a hand. At least not fully. The glove he wore had split open at the knuckles, and beneath it the skin was pale and wrinkled in long strips, as if it had been soaked too long in water or buried too long in ash. On the back of his hand there were numbers written in black ink. I remember one of them clearly, 18. When I woke, the lamp had gone out. I did not sleep after that. The next morning I went to see Mrs. Tallow, the widow who ran the Bell's kitchen and knew the business of every person who had ever slept under her roof. She was 50 if she was a day, sharp-eyed, with a mouth set in the shape of somebody who had outlived every fool in the county. I asked her about the building. She wiped her hands on her apron and said, "You mean the hotel." "I mean before that." Her face tightened. I waited. Finally she said, "Best not to borrow trouble from the dead, child." "It's not trouble I'm borrowing." That made her go still. I told her about the man in my room. About the smell, the watch, the coal dust. She did not laugh, that was the worst part. Instead she sat down at the table across from me and folded her hands. "Tell me exactly what he said." I repeated the words as best I could. They never finished waking up. "Count them." Her mouth went dry. "Then you need to stay away from the cellar stairs," she said. "There are cellar stairs." Her eyes moved toward the back door. "There shouldn't be." She wouldn't explain more than that, and when I pushed her she only said something had happened under the Bell before I was born, something old men still refused to name, a room that had been sealed, a doctor who had gone missing, a company clerk who had kept records nobody was supposed to read. That evening, after the office closed, I made my way to the county storage room and asked Mr. Harlan for the old shipment ledgers from the mine years. He grumbled, but he gave them to me. The books were thick and damp-smelling, bound in cracked leather, their pages yellowed and brittle. Most were inventory records for timber, rail ties, lamp oil, mule feed, and canned beans, but one ledger tucked into the back of a box labeled MISC, Office Waste, had a different hand in it, neater, smaller, more careful. It belonged to Dr. Silas Wren, company physician, Hollow Creek Coal and Railway. I sat at the desk and opened it. The entries were strange from the start. Not medicine orders. Not ordinary patient notes. They were lists of men, women, and children. Names, ages, room numbers, breathing rates, pulse counts, times asleep, times awake, and beside each line a short remark in the same tight handwriting. Dreaming of waters. Waking unable to speak. Sees man at foot of bed. Refused supper. Woke with cold dust under fingernails. My skin tightened at the last one. I turned page after page, and the date on the top corner shifted through the winter of 1918 and into the spring of 1919, just after the influenza ward was moved into the Bell Hotel. There were 86 names total. 47 of them matched the county's death list. 39 did not. At the bottom of the last page, written harder than the rest, was a sentence that made my mouth go dry. If the patients remain unaware of their condition, the town will remain calm. I read it twice before I understood the horror of it. Unaware of their condition. Not dead. Not cured. Unaware. I took the ledger with me and went straight to the one person in town old enough to remember the influenza ward and stubborn enough to talk if you caught him in the right mood. Amos Bledsoe, a former miner who lived alone in a shack near the Trestle Bridge, one leg stiff from a cave-in and one eye clouded white. He let me in after I knocked 3 times and waited long enough for him to get irritated. When I showed him the ledger, his face changed in a way I will never forget. He looked at the names, then at me, then away. "That book should have been burned," he said. "Tell me what happened." He stared into the stove for a long time before answering. "There was a room under the Bell," he said. "Before it was a hotel, before the flu, back when the mine was still running hard. Company kept it locked, said it was for storage, said it was for records. That was a lie. There were cots down there, blankets, buckets, a narrow table with lamps on it." "Why?" He swallowed. "Because after the explosion in 21 they had men who weren't dead enough to bury and not well enough to move. The doctor kept them below the hotel until the company decided what story to tell. Some had heads cracked, some had lung sickness, some had been gassed. A few," he stopped and rubbed his mouth. "A few woke up in the dark and started screaming for their wives. The owner didn't want screams, so the doctor gave them sedatives." "Sedatives?" Bromides, laudanum, ether when he was out of the other two kept them quiet. I felt a cold settling under my ribs. Did they survive? Amos laughed once, but there was no humor in it. Some did, some didn't, some were taken out at night and buried under another name. The company never liked paper that caused trouble. I looked down at the ledger again. The names here. Most of those folks were patients in the flu ward after the explosion, Amos said. Or so they said, but if you ask me, they weren't all sick. What do you mean? He leaned closer, his one good eye fixed on me. I mean, there were nights when they'd wake unable to move, unable to speak, eyes open, breathing shallow. The doctor called it hysteria, the women in town called it the night chest, the men called it bad air, but the ones who survived all said the same thing. What thing? He stood at the end of the bed. My blood went cold. I did not know then whether I should have been relieved or more frightened that someone else had seen the figure. I asked Amos who the man in the coat was. He stared at the floorboards a long time. Dr. Wren, he said at last, or what was left of him. According to Amos, Dr. Silas Wren had been a respected man in the early years, educated, clean-shaven, the sort of physician company owners liked because he used words like nervous disorder and sleep disturbance instead of asking hard questions. But after the explosion, he became obsessed with the workers who woke in the night gasping, unable to move, claiming they saw someone in the room with them. At first he wrote it off as shock. Then he started keeping records. Then he started keeping people. Not all at once, not publicly, but enough that the town noticed when the Bell's cellar light stayed on past midnight. When I asked what happened to Wren, Amos only said, he was found under the hotel with his watch stopped at 2:17. The number struck me like a blow. Why does everyone keep saying 2:17? His eye sharpened. Because that's when the boiler room blew the third valve and the vent system started pulling bad air back into the cellar. Anyone sleeping down there after 2:17 got the same sickness. What sickness? He said nothing for a moment. Then, the kind where your mind wakes before your body does. That night I returned to the Bell Hotel with the ledger tucked under my coat. I should have taken it to the sheriff, I should have left town, I should have burned the pages and pretended the whole thing had never happened. Instead, I did the thing frightened people always do when they are already standing too close to a disaster. I went looking for proof. The back hall of the Bell had a narrow stair that led down to the root cellar. The door at the top was newer than the rest of the building, and the paint around the frame was fresh enough to hide repairs. Mrs. Tallow had said there should not have been stairs there. That meant, of course, that there were. I lit a lantern and opened the door. Cold air rose from below, carrying the smell of mildew, rust, and something fouler underneath it, something like old medicine gone sweet and rotten. The steps descended farther than I expected. At the bottom, the floor opened into a basement room no bigger than a chapel, with stone walls sweating moisture and a row of iron hooks along one side. There were old pipes overhead, a cracked sink, a table with a basin, and beyond the table, set into the far wall, was a door I had not seen in any building plan. It was not locked. It was sealed. I put my shoulder to it. The door groaned open with a sound like a man waking up angry. Behind it lay the hidden room. Cots lined the walls, old and rusted, their mattresses gone flat with age, blankets folded on each, tin cups on a shelf, a row of hooks with faded tags still tied to them in twine, and along the back wall in black pencil. Names had been written over and over until the plaster itself looked bruised by memory. I stepped closer, lantern shaking in my hand. One name was written there more often than the others. Evelyn March. I stopped breathing. My first thought was that someone had played a grotesque joke on me, but the writing was old, scratched into the wall beneath layers of dust and moisture. Decades old, maybe more, and beneath my name in smaller writing another line. Wakes at 2:17. The lantern nearly slipped from my fingers. I was not listed in any county record until 1912. I was born in Pittsburgh, raised by my aunt, sent south after the fire. There was no reason my name should have been on that wall in that room under that hotel, written by hands that belonged to another century. I backed away so fast I hit the table and nearly fell. Then I heard the breathing. Not mine. Someone else. Slow, wet, not from the doorway. From deeper in the room. The lantern swung toward the far corner, and there, half hidden behind a hanging sheet of mildewed canvas, was a narrow opening in the stone wall. It led into another space. Smaller, lower. I should have left. Instead, I stepped through. The second room was less a room than a chamber carved into the earth, with a low ceiling supported by timber beams and a mattress on the floor. On the mattress sat a man in a miner's coat, his head lowered, his hands folded over something on his lap. For one wild, stupid second, I thought it was the man from my room. Then he lifted his face. It was Dr. Silas Wren. Or what remained of him. His skin was waxy pale, stretched too tight over the bones. His eyes were sunk deep, fever-bright, and too aware. The watch chain I had seen in my room hung from his vest, broken. In his lap lay the pocket watch, still stopped at 2:17. He smiled at me with lips that had almost forgotten how. "You came back," he said. The voice was dry as paper. I could not speak. He looked past me toward the room I had just left, as though expecting others to follow. "They always do," he murmured. "The living always come looking for the dead." "What is this place?" His smile thinned. "An emergency ward," he said. "A quiet ward, a place to hold the ones who could not be buried yet, the ones who woke during the night, the ones the company wanted counted as gone." The room tilted around me. "You kept them here." "Not all of them," he tilted his head slightly, almost curious. "Some left, some were moved, some stopped breathing before morning, but most of them," he looked at the watch, "most of them simply learned not to wake all the way." I thought then that he was mad. Or dead. Or both. He stood, and I saw how thin he was, how his coat hung on him like funeral cloth. But his eyes were what frightened me most. There was no confusion there, no dreamlike haze. He knew exactly what he had done. He took one step toward me. And I saw the marks on the wall behind him. Tallies. Names. Dozens of them. Every line a person. Every person counted, because someone had decided that if the body could not move, the truth need not either. He must have seen my face change, because he stopped and said, almost gently, "You know why they call it paralysis, Miss March?" I did not answer. "Because it is easier to name the symptom than the room." Then he pointed to the ceiling. And I heard from above us the slow creak of the hotel floor as someone walked across my bedroom. The lantern nearly went out in my hand. Wren watched me with a look that was almost pity. "They never leave the building," he whispered. "Not really, not once the air learns them." I do not know how I found the strength to run, but I did. I stumbled back through the hidden door, through the damp cellar, up the narrow stairs, and into the kitchen just as Mrs. Tallow screamed for me to stop. The smell hit me first. Gas. Not strong enough to kill outright, strong enough to twist the room in my lungs and make the edges of the world soften. Coal gas leaking from the old vent system. She grabbed my arm and shouted something I could barely hear over the roaring in my ears. Then the lamps flickered. The hallway upstairs thundered with footsteps. Not one set, many. I remember the panic in her face, the way she shoved me toward the front door, the way the whole hotel seemed to groan as if something inside it had finally shifted loose after years of waiting. I made it outside just in time to see the upstairs windows glow with orange light. Then the Bell Hotel caught fire. The fire spread fast, fed by rotten beams, old curtains, and gas that had been trapped in the walls longer than I had been alive. The town came running from every direction. Men with buckets, women in nightclothes, the sheriff, the preacher, Amos Bledsoe leaning on his cane and cursing every dead company man in the state. By dawn the Bell was a blackened shell. No one found Dr. Wren. No one found the hidden room. No one admitted to seeing the man in the miner's coat. But the ledger I had taken out with me survived, singed around the edges. That should have been the end of it. It was. For 3 weeks after the fire I did not sleep. I was afraid of the dark, afraid of closed doors, afraid of my own body going still while my mind kept moving. The town doctor said I was suffering from nerves. The preacher said it was temptation. Mrs. Tallow said it was the hotel trying to keep what belonged to it. At first I thought that was only a figure of speech. Then I began finding cold dust on my pillow every morning. Then I started waking at 2:17. Then one night, years later, after I had left Hollow Creek and taken a room in Cincinnati under a new name, I opened my eyes and saw the man standing at the foot of my bed again. Same hat. Same coat. Same pale hands. This time he was not alone. There were others behind him. Not clearly, not fully, just outlines in the dark, faces half-formed, shoulders, watches, work coats, hospital tags, a woman with a fever blanket around her shoulders, a child with one shoe missing, a miner with his jaw hanging open as if he had tried to scream and forgotten how. And at the center of them all, the man in the hat held up the pocket watch. 2:17. I could move that time. I could scream. I did both. When my landlady ran into the room with a lamp, the figures were gone. But on the wall above my bed, written in black dust as if a finger had dragged through soot, were the words. Count THEM. I left Cincinnati the next morning. I never returned to Hollow Creek. I have spent the years since trying to tell myself there was an explanation that low-grade gas leaks and old trauma and the frightful habits of the mind can make monsters out of shadows. I know what the doctors say. I know what the textbooks call sleep paralysis. I know the body can wake before the muscles do, and the mind can fill the silence with any terror it wants. But textbooks do not explain the ledger. They do not explain why my name was on a wall written long before I was born. They do not explain why every town record from Hollow Creek after 1934 lists the Bell Hotel as destroyed by fire, yet the county map still shows the cellar line beneath the lot, sealed and unmarked, as if the earth itself did not trust the building to stay buried. And they do not explain why some nights when I am half asleep and the room is just dark enough to confuse the shape of things, I still hear a watch stop at 2:17. I have learned this much in my life: there are places where history does not end, it only goes quiet. And in those places, if you wake at the wrong second, you may find someone already standing at the foot of your bed, counting the ones who never finished waking up.